As you know, the thesis of GTM Capital is that, if you put technologies and early stage startups in front of customers around the world, we can get some pretty incredible insights from customers on the use and applicability of that technology across the board. And so, we're happy to talk to any and all of you if you have any more questions about that. But today is not about me or GTM Capital. One of the things that we do, because our focus is on working with CIOs and IT executives in a lot of different capacities, mostly as a strategic advisor and confidant, and helping you on your innovation and digital transformation journeys. We often get asked about, hey, how do I get on advisory boards? How do I get on board roles? I have aspirations to do more than just my day job, and how do I get involved in other aspects of things? And one of the most requested, most asked aspect of that is really, hey, how can I be a board member? How can I get ready to become a board member now or in the future? And so, what we started doing is just creating some interesting conversation, dialogue, and content around this very important topic, specifically geared towards CIOs and IT executives. And so this is, our second session focus in on that. We launched a newsletter. The first part of that was really focused on interviewing Larry Quinlan, who was a former CIO of Deloitte, who has now gone on to take on several public and private boards. And then we got some feedback from some of you that, hey, it would be also amazing to, just understand some of the key skill sets that we need to learn. So this is the first workshop in that series of helping IT executives become board ready. And I'm super excited to be able to do this first session with Matt Abrahams, whom I've known for almost a decade. He runs an incredibly popular class on strategic communication at the Stanford GSB that is always oversubscribed. Unfortunately, they didn't have that class when I was there, but I was fortunate to have met him afterwards. And he's gracious to spend some time with us today. We're really going to treat this as a pretty informal, fireside chat. I have some questions that I have prepared, but I'm hoping that we'll keep this a pretty interactive session, especially for those of you who are on here, since we have an intimate group. Matt has also authored 2 books, and actually his next book is about to come out. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. Matt, do you want to just say a few words to introduce yourself before we hop into the Q&A and the fireside discussion?
Well, thank you so much, Sakib, for inviting me to be here. I am very excited to share any thoughts and ideas that I have. And I don't think I need to say more. I think I'd rather just jump right in. It's introductions are always awkward for me. So happy to be here and happy to chat.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for having us, and thanks for being here. So, maybe I'll start with a pretty sort of broad question, right? Like, when you think about lots of different skill sets for executives, for especially when it comes to the board, I'd say effective communication probably is at the top of that list. And IT executives, CIOs, CTOs, and CISOs, what are some of the practical tips that you can share with us so that we can communicate complex, often technical information that we're trying to relay to non-technical board members, and doing it in a way that actually resonates with them, that they understand and that they take action? Are there any tips and tricks that you have on?
Yeah, absolutely. I do a lot of work with people who have very technical, detailed, scientific topics to help them make it more accessible. And I love that you use that word accessible. It's not about dumbing things down. It's about making it more accessible. And there are lots of things to think about. First and foremost, you have to remember who your audience is. And for many people joining boards, you have to switch your hat switch your mind to be thinking the different hats that people wear and the level of knowledge that they need. The biggest fundamental mistake people make in their communication is they just focus on getting their information across rather than adapting it and translating it for those who need to receive it. Once you have that idea about what level to come in at, you need to do 2 things. One is provide a structure for that information that packages it up in a way that's really easy for people to digest. Our brains are wired for information that is structured. Listing information, walking through diagrams, flowcharts is not the most effective way. So finding a structure that works. I have one that I love. It's 3 simple questions. Sakib and others have heard this all the time because I really love it. It is what, so what, now what. So when you describe something, explain what it is, explain why it's important, and then explain what comes next after it. Maybe it's a Q&A, maybe it's a deeper dive, maybe it's some kind of demonstration. But just thinking of packaging information and what is it, why is it important, and what comes next can be really, really helpful. Now, to make it accessible, there are lots of tools that you can use to do that. Perhaps the most important tool is a comparison. Compare what you are talking about to something that people already know. It could be another technology stack. It could be another approach to solving this problem, but help people understand based on what they already know. That helps you to scaffold it. Similarly, if you can break it down into constituent parts, that can help as well. The academic world, we call it chunking. It's not a great name for it, but can you take things into different chunks that are reasonable? So you all suffer from the curse of knowledge. You know too much about what it is you're talking about. And the only antidote to the curse of knowledge is empathy and accessibility. And you need to use both of those to be successful. So hopefully in there was something of value that you can take away to help.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I love the concept of this curse of knowledge, right? Because if you think about us as IT professionals, we're frankly often relying on data and very like technical details that can be difficult for somebody to understand. So how can we strike the right balance between data-driven communication and storytelling, especially as it relates to presenting to the board?
Yeah, so I think story first. If you have to make a decision, position or set the context through story, and then give some of the technical detail and the data. Our brains are wired for story. For this latest book I wrote, I interviewed several neuroscientists, and it is very clear to me that story is critical. Our brains are wired for it. It's how we seek out information. It's how we store information. So start with some kind of story to set the context, and then go into the specific technical and data information. And then if you can, at the end, come back to the story you're telling or begin a different story equipped with that information. That will be the most helpful and the most useful. If you think about it, your goal in these board conversations is not just to share the information so people understand. You need to equip them to be able to talk about that information to others. And doing that through story is helpful. Technical detail and data are hard to remember and hard to give context to. So if you actually equip people, it helps. The analogy I always use for what this point I'm making is if you're interviewing for a job, the person who is interviewing you is often not the decider in the moment. They have to go back and talk and check it out with others. So it is in your best interest as the interviewee to equip them with information, stories, and relevant details that they can then speak on your behalf. You are in exactly the same role when you're on a board, equipping people to talk about what you're talking about in a meaningful way. And story is the best way to do that.
So, one of the biggest unlock for me in my journey of being a better presenter, which I'm still on.
I think we all are, yes.
I think it's a lifelong journey that you actually helped me make, right? And you just talked about that a little bit on story and storytelling. Because, I always thought like it's all about presentation. It's all about presentation. But there's actually a big difference between storytelling and presentation. Can you just sort of break that down for us a little bit and talk to us more about what you mean when you say people remember stories and our brains are wired?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you're right. They are different, but they are certainly related. And so to me, a story is nothing more than a logical connection of ideas that follows some kind of framework. And there are lots of different frameworks you can have. So you need to be thinking about the logical connection of ideas, what comes first, what comes second, third, and how do you connect those ideas together? If you find yourself in your storytelling, or what you think is storytelling, saying next and so, or second and third, then you're likely not telling a story. You're likely going through a list of details. A story has nice transitions and bridges that connect ideas together. The analogy I like to use when I think about storytelling is being a tour guide. Your job is to take people on a tour through your material. Every good tour guide knows you start by setting expectations, you have a logical path that you follow, and you never want to lose anybody. And how do you keep people together is how you move from one point to the next. It is in those transitions that people get lost. So storytelling is really the logical connection of ideas, the flow through which you take people. And a key component to a good story is being engaging. When we relay information, when we just present information, list in detail, we're not as concerned about how we engage the audience. But if you think about a story, a movie, a TV show, they're engaging. Your stories can be engaging too. And it all comes down to relevance. How do I make this story relevant to the people I'm talking to? And we can go into more detail about engagement techniques. But to me, a story is all about logical connection of ideas, has a beginning, middle, and end, and has clear transitions as you go.
Yeah, no, that's great, and I think there's a lot more that we can talk about that specifically,
Sure.
and perhaps in the Q&A we can come back to it. But I know for me that was one of the biggest locks, and I think it's related to kind of what we just talked about from a storytelling perspective. Is this idea of like being adaptable, right?
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to communication, different personalities in the room, different situations. So maybe help us talk us through a little bit of that. Maybe give us some examples on how board members can adjust their communication style to match the room, to match the mood of the room, right? And handle unexpected things like questions or surprises or hopefully no hecklers, but maybe hecklers too.
Yes. So for this new book I wrote is all about speaking in the moment, spontaneous speaking. So I spent a lot of time, years actually, studying this and how to help people be better in the moment, answering questions, giving feedback, fixing mistakes, making small talk. And a lot of it has to do with reading the room. And to me, reading the room, first and foremost, is the reconnaissance, reflection, and research that you do before you ever open the door to the room or log into the Zoom. You have to think about who's in the room, what's important to them, where are their potential points of hesitation, concern, and resistance, what are their attitudes, what are some of the things that they value. If we can tap into the things they value and demonstrate that what we're advocating for is consistent with those, that gives us a huge boost in trying to be effective. So before you ever enter the room and have to adjust, you think about the folks who are there and the context in which you're in. And the context could be something as simple as time of day. People are very different out right after lunch versus at the end of the day, et cetera. One of my colleagues at the business school studied probation hearings. And let me tell you, if you are ever up for probation, you want to be early in the morning. Because as the day goes on, the judges say no more frequently, just because no is the easiest answer. And that's true for the types of decisions that you all are asking for, trying to help others make. So think about context as well. Now, when you're physically in the moment, when you're in that moment and you're reading the room, it's all about listening. It's about paying attention to what's going on, people's nonverbal behavior, the types of input and insights people are giving. And based on that, you need to think about, how can I adjust and pivot? What helps you do this is two things. One, not being so wedded to the material that you have. Some people go into sessions like board meetings and say, I am going to get from A to Z through my material, come hell or high water. It does not matter what happens. And the goal of my success, while measuring my success, my goal is to just get through my material. I obviously think that's a mistake. The goal is to help people understand and get the information they need. And if you're getting input and insight that what the path you're going down isn't getting there, or people are getting confused, you need to adjust and adapt. So the first thing we have to do is make sure our goal is not getting through the material, but making sure we're helping people and helping them understand. The second thing we have to do is we have to have general themes and ideas that we want to get across, so that we can be fluid and flexible as things change. If we're rigid, it's very hard to adjust and adapt. So I might go into a board meeting with 2 or 3 key themes. Now I have some ideas and data points and stories I want to tell, but if things change in the moment, then I know that I can still support those themes and jettison some of the content that I have. So it's about mindset, it's about listening, it's about being prepared in advance.
Yeah. I mean, I think preparation can lead to a lot more flexibility and adaptability, right, in the moment.
Absolutely. It's like being an athlete. Athletes prepare and drill a lot for the spontaneous moment of what happens on the court, on the pitch, or in the field.
Right. And part of that spontaneity is probably in boardrooms can be interesting drama rooms, right? Because you have different personalities, you have different interests, people coming at it from different takes. And these are all very highly successful
Mhm.
strong personalities. So it's not uncommon to have really difficult questions, sometimes out of the
Yeah.
left field, from fellow board members or other stakeholders. How do you recommend handling difficult questions as they come up?
Yeah, well, as best as you can. So when difficult question, first and foremost, we have to reframe the situation. Many of us feel that a challenging or difficult question is a personal threat, and we have to get defensive and defend our stake. I think the best approach is to see these as opportunities to connect, to engage, to extend, to learn, to expand. Even if somebody is gunning for you, you still looking at it as an opportunity changes your whole demeanor. It opens you up physically. Many of us, when we get defensive, get tight. It changes the depth and length of your responses. We tend to say more when we feel it's an opportunity versus a threat. Our tone changes and is more collaborative. So part of it is a mindset shift. This is an opportunity to engage. And quite frankly, I would much rather engage with somebody who's hostile to my point of view than somebody who's apathetic. Because at least the person who's hostile to my point of view has passion, care, and concern. And so I want to focus on that. It is important, I believe, in a challenging Q&A situation or any Q&A situation to demonstrate that you're interested in understanding the person's perspective. Doesn't mean you agree. You just want to understand where they're coming from. And a great way to do that is to ask follow-up questions whose tone is neutral and or to paraphrase. So what I hear you saying is, or I hear that cost is something that's very important to you. Again, you're not agreeing, you're just acknowledging. Often in these challenging situations, by doing this clarification, you come to realize that there are synergies, there are points of similarity and agreement. Doesn't mean you agree on everything, but if we instantly get defensive and come back at somebody strong, we miss that opportunity to find that type of connection. So I encourage everybody to really listen well, to paraphrase, ask questions, and take this as an opportunity. That said, you can also practice and drill. You can talk to people and say, what do you think some of the challenges will be? List out and itemize some of those questions. Practice what you might say in those circumstances so you can be better prepared when those conversations and challenging questions come.
I love that mindset shift, right? That if somebody's, because I think we're all wired, right? Fight or flight.
Yeah.
And it's like somebody asks you a tough question, we almost immediately then the reaction is to feel like we're being attacked. So I
Yeah.
love this mindset shift. Like, oh no, they are just passionate about this topic. And here's an opportunity to potentially bring somebody else on to my point of view by educating them, by essentially persuading them to why I think my story makes sense in the context that we're discussing.
Right. And we have a lot of research to say that when you approach it in an open way like that, the other person will often accommodate, right? It's when I get defensive and punch back, they get defensive and punch back harder. And that leads us to nowhere good.
Yeah. So I think connected to that would just be, Matt, like, you got to be a good listener, right? Because if somebody's
Absolutely.
passionate about something or hot about a topic and pounding fists, or even if they're not, they're just calm and just have, and I think probably this, flip side of that coin is like being a very good listener. Do you have any, sort of tips
Oh, I
for
have lots of
how do
thoughts on listening. One of the things that I do is I host a podcast for Stanford's Business School. It's called Think Fast, Talk Smart. It's all about communication. Obviously, I think people should consider listening to it. And over the 100 episodes we've done, two things have come very clear. One, we always have to be in service of our audience. Two, we have to listen. And we don't think about listening as an important skill often. We just feel it's a necessary evil. It is critical. I have a whole chapter in the new book dedicated to it. I've spent a lot of time thinking about listening. A colleague of mine at the business school, his name is Collins Dobbs. He teaches a class on crucial conversations, the really gnarly conversations. And he teaches a particular skill for helping people have those conversations. And I've asked him, with his permission, to borrow his framework for listening, because I think it applies perfectly. And it's three things: pace, space, grace. To be a better listener, you need a little of each of these. In terms of pace, we have to slow down. I don't have to tell all of you that you're incredibly busy. The fact that you've dedicated some time in your life today to listen to this is because you see it as important, but also you're sacrificing other things you could be doing. So things come really fast and we need to slow ourselves down. We listen better when we are calmer and things are moving more slowly. Second, we have to give ourselves space. Sometimes it's physical space. I have to get into an environment where I can literally listen and hear you better. But more importantly, it's mental space. We have to make the mental space to really focus and be present to better understand. The reality is most of us listen just well enough to get the gist of what somebody is saying, to then begin thinking, responding, judging, and evaluating. And we miss nuance and we miss opportunity. And then the third part is grace. You have to give yourself permission to be present and not only to listen to what the other person in the context and what's happening with inside you. So you might have a reaction when some, ooh, I remember doing that in my own life and that was troublesome. Listen to that and give yourself permission to bring that information in. We have this feeling that listening is all external, and that's an important part, but we also makes others who talk to us feel as if they're being listened to better. And that's incredibly important as well.
I love that. I love that framework. And it's funny, you know, as you were speaking and talking about like, hey, if somebody's saying something, you're already formulating, you know, what you're going to say,
yeah,
rebuttal point. And I was actually doing that. So I caught myself doing that now because I wanted to know, like, as the conversations are going on and, you know, different people are coming in, how do I insert my point of view? Right? Like, what's the right way of going in and asking my questions or providing my point of view, you know, in a graceful way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, many of us are worried about what we're saying next, and we focus on that to the exclusion of what's being currently said. And people can feel that. People know when you've disconnected and you miss some of that opportunity. There are lots of ways, to your point, though, your concern, to wedge your voice in. I spend a lot of time helping people who work in very active, engaged, extroverted organizations where everybody's piling on. I grew up in a family like that. The only way to be heard in my family was to speak louder and longer than anybody else. And we work in environments like that. And for some of us, it's hard to get our voice in edgewise. So I have some suggestions. One is using paraphrasing. I think paraphrasing is one of the most important skills anybody can develop, but especially leaders. Paraphrasing does so many things for you. One thing it does is it allows you to insert your voice in a conversation. You simply highlight or extract something of meaning and value that somebody said, and then you comment on it. So if there's a big frenzy of conversation going on, I could say, cost is something that's really important. In fact, and then all of a sudden I go into my point. Labeling something that has been discussed, like cost, and then inserting myself gives me permission to add my voice to it. Another way to do it is to call out a question. So a question about cost. And again, the question gives you the legitimacy to insert your voice. And then finally, emotion. You can lead with an emotion. I'm very concerned about cost. That's your permission to insert yourself and wedge into the conversation. So there are many ways to wedge into conversation. So you don't have to worry about using your listening time to prepare for that. Listen, be focused, and then move forward. Now, I have to tell you, my wife would argue that I don't always practice what I preach. So do as I say, not as I do.
Well, we're all humans at the end of it, right? So that's okay.
Yes.
We'll forgive you. So I want to kind of switch to, and I know we're kind of getting to the end of it, and I want to open up the audience here as well for Q&A, but I want to ask two tactical questions. My first one is, you know, as CIOs, IT executives, we're doing a lot of different presentations. Do you have any frameworks that we can leverage from today onwards? Like, okay, we're going to make better presentations.
Yeah, so if I were to give the best practices on making a better presentation, first and foremost, know your audience. Check your vernacular, your words, your lexicon. Use language that's appropriate for your audience. You all know way too many technical terms and ideas, and you can lose people in that. The next thing to do is to really think about how to structure content. Again, what, so what, now what is a wonderful structure. There are many others. Two that you might find most useful. One is comparison, contrast, conclusion. Lay out how different ideas are similar, how they're different, and then your conclusion based on that. Or use what any of you who've ever been pitched to have probably heard, which is problem, solution, benefit. Here's the problem, here's how we solve it, and here's the benefit. Those are two structures that are very commonly used by people in IT and other places. Leverage those structures. Again, it gives you a beginning, middle, and end, helps you package your content tightly and concisely so others can remember it and repeat it. And then the last thing I would say is be engaging. there are three ways I think to engage an audience. One is to get them physically involved, get them doing something physically, taking a poll, raising their hands, watching a video, looking at an image, going through a process flow where people's bodies go, their brains follow. Get them engaged mentally, ask questions, use analogies, that gets our brain involved. And then finally, use language, call people by name, use inclusive language, us, you, we, that brings people in. And then my favorite language use is what I call time traveling language. I can take you into the future by saying, picture this, or what if we could? I could tell you something, or I could ask you, what if we could? And it's a very different experience for you as you listen to that. So it's about knowing your audience, it's about leveraging the structure, and it's about being engaging. All of those things will help you be more effective in your messaging.
Awesome. My last question, since COVID, most of us have been spending most of our time meeting virtually, right? Whether it's on Zoom or Teams. What are some tactical approaches that we should be using to, portray ourselves as senior executives, board-ready members in our, virtual meetings with anybody?
Yeah. So again, engagement is key. Getting people involved, seeing that they're involved. I'm going to take a step back and just give you some foundational principles. The way you physically show up virtually matters a lot. Some of us sit so far away that we look like a distant constellation. Others of us are sitting in the shadows. I can't tell you the number of people, and I'm not going to call anybody out on this call, who look like they're in the witness protection program. Get yourself some good lighting. Raise the camera up so it's not coming under our chin. We all use laptops. Nobody looks good from that angle. Gesture. Now you have to gesture differently. Gestures show a lot of authority. People who gesture, and especially those who gesture broadly, demonstrate power, demonstrate authority. But when you gesture in the little box, you got to gesture higher. See how my hands are at my shoulder level? If you saw me in this room, you'd think he's crazy. Nobody gestures like that. But here it looks normal. So from just a tactical how you show up, make sure people can see you, fill half your screen, gesture, and you're going to look like you know your stuff, that you're confident, and people are going to listen to you.
Very effective, very useful, very useful. I have some improvements to make.
So do I.
I want to ask one last question here. Talk to us a little bit about the motivation behind writing a second book. It's about, and talk to us a little bit about your new book.
Sure, I'll do it very quickly. And in the chat, I've just put a link to a resource, the resources page. We were talking about speaking anxiety. If you go to that page, there's a whole bunch of work that I've done and others on helping people get better at managing anxiety. Very quickly, it became very clear to me that the area of communication people struggle with the most is in the moment communication. Planned communication is hard. When you're writing a pitch, a presentation, preparing a meeting, how you respond in the moment is incredibly challenging. Our MBA students, some of the best and brightest young business minds, struggle when the mean, evil professor says, "What do you think?" The cold call. And so over time, over the past several years, I've developed a methodology. The book captures the methodology in the first half. In the second half, it applies the methodology to very specific situations like giving a toast or a tribute, answering questions, giving feedback, making small talk. I am glad you'll all get copies. I would love to hear your feedback on the book. I hope it will help you. And if it doesn't help you, it will certainly help people that report into your organizations. If I can be of service to any of you, I have a consulting practice, but I'm also doing free book talks where I just come in and do what Saqib's done, where you just interview me. Happy to do that. My information is readily available. Thank you for your time. I hope there was something of value that I shared that will help you in your board presence. And I wish you all well. As Saqib said, I do have to take off. I think they're going to share a little bit more with you, but I have a room of students who in 2 minutes expect me to be saying something important. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Matt. Really appreciate it. We learned a tremendous amount. Thank you so much.